Evelyn met Sarah in the dark warehouse, confessing her love for Michael. But Sarah smiled, revealing she was Evelyn all along. Then Liam burst in, gun in hand. What happens next? I never thought you'd show up here. Evelyn's voice sliced through the dim hum of the abandoned warehouse, her words hanging in the stale air like smoke from a forgotten cigarette, the faint, acrid tang of rust and decay clinging to every breath. She stood by a rusted metal beam, arms crossed tight over her chest, the faint glow from a distant street lamp filtering through cracked windows to paint her face in sharp, unforgiving shadows. Her eyes, wide and searching, betrayed the knot twisting inside her, that desperate ache to be seen, truly seen, without the masks she wore so well. The oppressive weight of hidden longings pressing down like the sagging ceiling above. Sarah lingered in the doorway, her silhouette hesitant against the peeling paint of the walls, flakes of it drifting down like silent accusations. She clutched her coat lapels, fingers pale and insistent, as if the fabric could anchor her swirling envy amid the chill that seeped through the cracks. The drive to carve out her own space, away from the borrowed shine of others' lives, had led her here, to this illicit corner of the city, where secrets festered like untreated wounds, the damp concrete floor echoing her isolation. I had to, she murmured, stepping forward, her heels echoing softly on the scarred surface, each click a slow unraveling in the heavy silence. The scent of damp rust and old oil clung to everything, pressing down like an unspoken accusation, thickening the air with melancholic dread. They had arranged this meeting through cryptic texts, away from the polished gatherings where they all pretended at perfection. Michael's effortless charm at dinner parties, Evelyn's poised laughter masking her guarded heart, Sarah's quiet nods hiding her gnawing sense of inadequacy. But tonight, the facade cracked. Slowly, inexorably. Evelyn shifted her weight, her breath shallow, the weight of her hidden desires, those yearnings for a love that wouldn't shatter at the first glimpse of her true self, pushing her to probe deeper into the shadows. Why now? After all the times we've circled each other, smiling through the lies? Her voice lingered, low and fractured, stirring the dust motes that swirled in the faint light. Sarah's gaze dropped to the floor, where dust motes danced in the thin light, stirred by their intrusion, catching like fragile memories in the oppressive gloom. She envied Evelyn's poise, that subtle command over conversations, even as it fueled her own drive to break free, to claim something real amid the rot. Because I can't pretend anymore. Not with him. The words escaped her like a confession, raw and unbidden, her voice trembling with the jealousy that had simmered for months, now boiling over in the stifling air. Him. Michael. The one whose arrogant grin hid depths she longed to plumb, to define herself against, the echo of his laughter haunting her like a distant, mocking rumble. Evelyn froze, her pulse thudding in her ears, a cold wave of betrayal washing over her, chilling the already frigid space. She had manipulated conversations, steered glances, all to draw him closer without risking her own exposure, the metallic bite of fear coating her tongue. Now this, Sarah's admission igniting a spark of possessive fury beneath her anxiety, shadows lengthening across the walls. Michael? The name came out sharper than intended, laced with the guilt of her own deceptions, the ways she'd twisted moments to keep him near, fearing abandonment if he saw her shadows, the oppressive darkness seeming to close in tighter. Sarah nodded, stepping closer, the space between them shrinking under the oppressive weight of shared longing, the air growing heavier with each hesitant breath. I've watched you both, the way he looks at you, but it's the same for me. I love him. I think he feels it too. Her eyes lifted, envious and lost, pleading for validation that wouldn't come, the faint drip of water from a distant pipe punctuating the melancholy. The air thickened with unease, the slow unraveling of their perfect illusions, Evelyn's guarded heart fracturing at the competition, Sarah's envy blooming into something sharper, more isolating, the warehouse's chill seeping into their bones. Evelyn's mind raced, shadows of manipulation flickering in the dim light. Deny it. Deflect. Protect the fragile hope of acceptance. But the words stuck, guilt coiling in her chest like barbed wire, drawing invisible blood. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, voice barely audible over the distant rumble of traffic outside, a low growl that mirrored her inner turmoil. Betrayal hung between them, unspoken yet palpable, the clandestine meeting birthing a chasm neither could bridge, the scent of decay intensifying. Sarah's face crumpled, her drive for identity now tainted by the sting of rivalry, while Evelyn's fears whispered of inevitable rejection, the walls echoing their silent despair. In that moment, the warehouse felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of what they'd unleashed. Jealousy not just for him, but for the lives they each coveted, perfect on the surface, rotten within, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down like an unrelenting fog. Days blurred into a haze of regret after the warehouse standoff, the weight of unspoken accusations pressing like damp rot on Evelyn's chest. Each breath labored in the lingering chill. Guilt coiled in her gut, suspicion gnawing at the edges of her resolve. Had his sudden appearance been a ploy, or a desperate plea? Nights stretched endlessly, her mind replaying fractured shadows in the dim glow of her solitary room, until the pull became unbearable, a slow, inexorable tide. Fingers trembling over her phone in the dim glow of her apartment, she drafted the message, heart pounding with the slow dread of unraveling truths, the screen's cold light casting harsh shadows on her face. "Been carrying this weight alone for too long," Michael said, his voice echoing off the warehouse's corroded walls, the words scraping like gravel underfoot, rough and unrelenting. Dust motes swirled in the faint light seeping from a high, shattered pane, catching on his knuckles as he extended a hand towards Sarah, the gesture heavy with unspoken plea. His palm hovered inches from her arm, fingers splayed not in demand, but in a plea masked as certainty. Arrogance etched into the lines of his face, though his eyes flickered with the shadow of something brittle beneath, the air thick with the metallic tang of rust. Sarah stepped back, her heel grinding against a scatter of broken glass that tinkled like distant chimes in the oppressive quiet, each shard glinting faintly in the gloom. She clutched the frayed edge of her coat, the fabric rough against her skin, carrying the faint, acrid scent of old rain and neglect that permeated the space. Envy coiled in her chest, sharp as the shards at her feet. Michael's life, so polished on the surface, now cracked open here in this forgotten place, mirroring her own unraveling, the chills seeping deeper into her core. "You think a touch fixes it? After all the stories you've spun about perfection?" Her tone laced with accusation, but her gaze darted to Liam, standing rigid in the gloom, his silhouette a dark sentinel against the rusted beams, his presence pulling at her like an invisible thread. She wanted to pull away from them both, to carve out space where her jealousy wouldn't fester. Yet the pull toward Liam, his quiet intensity, drew her like a moth to a dim bulb, flickering uncertainly. Liam's eyes narrowed, the dim light carving hollows under his cheekbones, amplifying the controlled tension in his jaw, shadows playing across his features like unspoken doubts. He shifted his weight, boots scuffing the concrete floor dusted with years of abandonment, the sound deliberate, probing, echoing softly in the vast emptiness. Truth was his anchor, but control slipped here, in the tangle of their shared silences, where lies about contentment had bound them like invisible chains, the oppressive air weighing on his shoulders. "What's this really about, Michael? Another performance to keep the facade intact?" His voice cut low, laced with determination that bordered on possession, fingers curling at his sides as if to grasp the unraveling threads of their evening, the faint scent of oil rising around him. He watched Sarah's hesitation, suspicion blooming in his gut like ink in water. Did her glance seek alliance or escape? His fear gnawed deeper, the warehouse's stale air thickening around him, trapping him in the echo of half-truths, each breath a labored draw. Michael's hand dropped, slapping against his thigh with a dull thud that reverberated through the empty space, stirring the dust into lazy swirls. Guilt seeped into his posture, shoulders hunching under the invisible press of exposure. his arrogance fracturing like the cracked windows overhead, letting in slivers of cold night air. "It's not a show, Sarah. I need you to see me. Really see." The confession hung there, raw and unpolished, his breath coming in shallow pools that stirred the dust, the vulnerability hanging heavy in the melancholic hush. He turned to her fully, ignoring Liam's scrutiny, the air between them laced with the metallic tang of rust and unspoken regrets, the shadows deepening around them. Sarah's pulse thrummed in her ears, a slow, insistent rhythm against the warehouse's hush, drowning out the distant city murmurs. She envied Michael's boldness even as it repelled her, her own desires muddled, unworthy in the face of it, the chill biting at her exposed skin. "See you? Or the version you want me to believe?" Her words trembled on the edge, envy twisting into doubt, her eyes flicking back to Liam. Did he sense her wavering, her fear of being the failure in this fractured trio? The oppressive gloom seemed to pulse with their tension. Liam stepped closer, the floor creaking under him, his presence a shadow elongating across the grimy floor, swallowing the faint light. Suspicion sharpened his stare, dissecting the moment. Michael's reach, Sarah's retreat. They masked deeper deceptions, ones that threatened to ensnare him in their web, the air growing thicker with each step. Clarity? This place reeks of it already. Lies piling up like this debris. His hand brushed Sarah's elbow, light but insistent, a bid to draw her into his orbit, to uncover what hid behind her envious gaze, the touch warm against the cold. The gesture ignited a spark of possessiveness in him, guilt flickering at its edges, as the melancholic weight of their isolation pressed in, slow and unrelenting, the warehouse's decay echoing their inner rot. Sarah's fingers trembled as they brushed Michael's, the touch igniting a flicker of warmth amid the warehouse's stifling chill, a brief spark in the endless dark. Yet beneath her skin, guilt coiled like rusted wire, memories of buried connections surfacing unbidden, sharp and unrelenting. The air grew heavier, dust settling on their joined hands, as if to seal the moment's fragility, the faint metallic scent intensifying. In that suspended breath, fear stirred, a quiet dread that the truths they both harbored might unravel everything, twisting confession into something far more treacherous, the shadows whispering doubts. "Why are you really here, Sarah?" Liam's voice cut through the warehouse's stale hush, low and edged with suspicion, his extended hand pausing midair like a stalled pendulum, hovering in the dim, oppressive light. Sarah froze, her fingers twisting the frayed hem of her coat, the fabric rough against her skin from too many anxious pulls, threads fraying like her resolve. The dim light from the shattered pane above filtered down in jagged slivers, painting Liam's face in stark contrasts. His eyes narrowed, searching her like she was a puzzle with missing edges, shadows carving deep lines. She could smell the rust on the walls, metallic and biting, mingling with the faint, acrid tang of old oil from forgotten machinery, coating her throat. Her throat tightened. She'd come here chasing fragments of herself, away from the polished facades of dinner parties and shared smiles that felt borrowed, the weight of pretense lingering like fog. But now, with Liam's question hanging between them, envy clawed at her chest. Envy for the certainty in his stance, the way he always seemed to grasp the threads others let slip, his presence dominating the gloom. I needed to hear it from you," she murmured, her voice barely stirring the dust that clung to everything, a faint whisper lost in the vast space. Guilt bloomed in her gut, heavy as the shadows pooling at their feet, cold and unyielding. She'd envied Evelyn's effortless grace earlier that evening, the way laughter lit her features without effort, while Sarah felt like a ghost in her own life, translucent and fading. And Liam, always probing, always controlling the narrative, had drawn her here with promises of truth, his words echoing in her mind. But the weight Michael had just confessed lingered, his words about carrying burdens alone now twisting into something sharper, aimed at her, the air thickening with unspoken barbs. Evelyn shifted in the corner, her silhouette half swallowed by the gloom of stacked crates, their splintered wood exhaling a musty scent that prickled her nostrils, dusty and decayed. She clutched her arms around herself, nails digging crescents into her sleeves, guarding the ache that threatened to spill out, a deep, throbbing pain. Anxious flickers danced in her mind, rejection's cold bite, abandonment's echo, relentless and gnawing. She'd followed them here, driven by a desperate hunger for acceptance, only to overhear Michael's plea to Sarah, the words searing like acid. But it wasn't just that. Her own secrets tangled with theirs, threads she couldn't sever, pulling tighter. "You both think this is simple," she said, her tone guarded, words slipping out before she could cage them, voice fracturing in the hush. "Liam, you act like you're unearthing buried bones, but what if they're yours? And Sarah—" She trailed off, the air thickening with unspoken accusations, the oppressive weight settling heavier. Liam's gaze snapped to Evelyn, his determination hardening into something possessive, a need to steer this fracturing moment back under his grip, shadows sharpening his features. Fear gnawed at him, the terror of lies unraveling, of identities crumbling like the warehouse's flaking beams, peeling away in slow, inevitable layers. "What do you mean, my bones?" he demanded, stepping closer, his boots scraping against the grit-strewn concrete, the sound reverberating, slow and deliberate, amplifying the oppressive press of the space around them, dust rising faintly. Evelyn's breath hitched, her drive to be seen warring with the shadow of manipulation, an internal storm raging in the dim light. She couldn't let vulnerability win, not yet, the fear coiling like smoke. But the confession, Michael's, now theirs, demanded more, pulling at her like an undertow. Inadvertently, her words tumbled forth, revealing the knot she'd hidden. "Because I've been talking to Michael too. For months. He told me about the letters you both sent him, Sarah's pleas for escape, Liam's questions about the past. He thought you were reaching out separately, but it's all connected. You're both chasing the same ghost, and it leads right back to me." The revelation hung, heavy and melancholic, the air growing colder. Sarah's world tilted, envy shattering into raw fear, a dizzying spin in the gloom. Unworthy, failure, the label she dreaded surged up, cold and choking, gripping her throat. Liam's control slipped, his hand dropping as paranoia flickered in his eyes. The truth he'd sought, now a noose tightening around them all, shadows closing in. Evelyn watched, heart pounding, the melancholy weight of their entangled desires pressing down like the warehouse's sagging roof, threatening to collapse, the faint creak of beams underscoring the dread. Guilt seeped through the cracks, slow and inexorable, as fear took root in the silence that followed, thick and suffocating. The warehouse's shadows lengthened, pressing in like unspoken accusations, as Sarah's heart thudded with a melancholic ache, each beat echoing in the vast emptiness. Guilt coiled through her veins, heavier than the dust-laden air, mingling with the raw longing she'd buried for so long, a bitter taste on her tongue. Time stretched taut in the silence, each breath a slow unraveling of her defenses, the chill deepening. Cornered by the weight of his gaze, she felt the irreversible pull, her fingers unclenching from the coat's hem, resolve hardening amid the oppressive gloom, ready to bear the truth that haunted her soul, shadows whispering relentlessly. Evelyn dropped her hand from the coat hem, the fabric whispering against her thigh as she stepped forward, closing the gap between her and Liam, the sound soft yet deliberate in the hush. The warehouse's concrete floor echoed her soul's scrape, a gritty drag that pulled at the silence like frayed thread, dust swirling lazily. Dust motes swirled in the dim overhead light, clinging to the sweat beading on her collarbone, cold and clammy. Liam's eyes narrowed, his extended hand curling into a fist at his side, knuckles paling in the faint glow. He didn't retreat, his stance unyielding against the encroaching dark. Behind him, Michael shifted from the shadowed crates, his polished shoes clicking once, twice against the floor, the sharp sound slicing the heavy air. Michael's face, usually a mask of smug assurance, cracked at the edges, lips pressed thin, gaze darting between them like a cornered animal sizing up escape, the scent of his cologne faint amid the decay. "You think this is about some game?" Evelyn's voice emerged low, threaded with a tremor she couldn't suppress, her chest tightening as if the walls themselves pressed inward, squeezing the breath from her lungs. She stopped inches from Liam, close enough to catch the faint metallic tang of his aftershave, mixed with the warehouse's rust and oil, a cloying mix. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, a relentless drum urging her onward, past the fear knotting her gut, shadows flickering across her face. Liam's jaw didn't move, but his stare bored into hers, unyielding, piercing through the gloom. "Sarah, Evelyn, whatever name you're hiding behind today, answer me. Why here? Why now?" His words hung, deliberate, each one a weight dragging at the space between them, the air growing thicker. He glanced over his shoulder at Michael, whose fingers flexed against his thigh, knuckles whitening in the dim light. The three of them formed a brittle triangle, unspoken currents crackling like exposed wires, tension humming low. Michael cleared his throat, the sound wet and forced, echoing slightly in the vast space. "This is ridiculous. We're not kids playing secrets in the dark." But his voice faltered, arrogance fraying into something raw, his eyes locking on Evelyn with a hunger that belied his posture, shadows deepening in his gaze. He took a step closer, invading the charged air, his cologne, a sharp citrus undercut by something sour, wafting toward her, mingling with the rot. In that moment, the facade splintered. His drive to hold the perfect life teetered, insecurities bubbling up like ink in water, slow and staining. Evelyn's breath hitched. The tension coiled tighter, a serpent wrapping around her ribs, squeezing out the air, the oppressive gloom pressing relentlessly. She could feel it now, the unspoken truths pressing like ghosts against her skin, cold and insistent. Liam's obsession to control, to unearth every buried lie, mirrored her own guarded walls, built high to shield the desires that terrified her. Michael's arrogance, a brittle shell over voids he refused to name. And beneath it all, the longing gnawed, a quiet ache for acceptance that twisted into guilt, heavy as lead in her veins, the faint drip of water punctuating the silence. "I came because I can't pretend anymore," she said, her words spilling out irreversible, a dam breaking in slow, deliberate cracks, voice trembling yet resolute. She turned to Michael first, her gaze stripping away his mask, shadows playing across his features. "You act like everything's flawless, but I see you. The nights you stare at the ceiling, wondering if anyone's real. And Liam—" She pivoted back, her hand lifting to hover near his chest, not touching but close enough to feel the heat radiating from him, warm against the chill. "You control everything to avoid the trap of who you might be. But us? This hidden pull between all three? It's not a lie. It's the truth I've been starving for. Love me as I am, or let me shatter trying." The plea hung, vulnerable and raw, in the thickening air. Liam's fist unclenched, fingers trembling not from fear, but from the raw edge of revelation, shadows softening his outline. Michael's face paled, his arrogance crumbling into a vulnerable stare, longing mirroring hers in the dim light, eyes reflecting the faint glow. The warehouse seemed to contract, the weight of their shared secrets bearing down, guilt threading through the air like invisible smoke, melancholic and heavy. No one moved. The silence stretched, oppressive and intimate, as the first fracture of truth echoed in their bones, a slow, resonant ache. As Evelyn's breath mingled with Liam's in the warehouse's stifling hush, guilt coiled in her chest like rusted wire, tightening with every unspoken betrayal, the metallic scent sharp in her nostrils. The dim light cast long shadows that seemed to reach for their hidden fractures, the air growing heavier, oppressive, laden with dust and regret. Time blurred in that suspended moment, the private tension fraying at the edges, poised to erupt into a public unraveling that would shatter their illusions and drown them in despair. The faint creak of settling beams underscoring the dread. Liam's words shattered the fragile truce Evelyn had clung to, his voice a jagged blade slicing through the warehouse's stale air, rough and unrelenting. She froze mid-step, her pulse hammering in her throat as the echo of his accusation, "You're sleeping with her, aren't you?" ricocheted off the rusted metal walls, reverberating like a death knell. But it wasn't Liam's gaze that pinned her now. It was Michael's, emerging from the shadows near the loading dock, his face a mask of feigned surprise that cracked at the edges, eyes glinting in the gloom. Sarah lingered behind him, her fingers twisting the strap of her worn leather bag, eyes wide with a hunger that bordered on accusation, the leather creaking softly. The dim bulb overhead buzzed faintly, casting elongated shadows that twisted like accusations across the concrete floor, gritty underfoot. Evelyn's mouth went dry, the metallic tang of fear coating her tongue, as she realized the others had followed her here, drawn by the anonymous text that had lured them all to this forsaken place, the chill deepening with each revelation. "You think you can hide it forever?" Liam pressed. But Michael cut him off with a sharp laugh, stepping forward to place a possessive hand on Evelyn's shoulder, the touch burning through her blouse like a brand. The touch burned through her blouse, a reminder of their stolen nights, the ones she'd buried under layers of denial to keep Sarah at arm's length, the warmth clashing with the cold air. "This is ridiculous," Michael said, his tone laced with that arrogant lilt he wielded like armor, yet undercut by a tremor. Yet his fingers dug in too tightly, betraying the tremor beneath his control, knuckles paling. He glanced at Sarah, who stood frozen, her envy blooming into something sharper as she pieced together the fragments, the late calls, the unexplained absences, the way Evelyn's gaze always softened around him, shadows shifting across her face. Evelyn pulled away, the sudden movement sending a cascade of loose gravel skittering across the floor, the pebbles rattling like scattered secrets. Her drive to be loved, truly seen, clashed against the fear gnawing at her core. Rejection for the desires she'd hidden, the manipulations she'd spun to avoid the raw edge of vulnerability, a bitter taste rising. "It's not what you think," she whispered, but the lie hung limp, exposed under the weight of their stares, the air thickening. Sarah's lips parted, a soft gasp escaping as realization dawned, sharp and cutting. "You and him?" Her voice cracked, envy twisting into betrayal, her own search for identity fracturing further, the oppressive gloom amplifying her despair. She had envied Evelyn's poise, Michael's confidence, never suspecting the web that ensnared her too. Threads pulling tight. Michael's facade splintered then. "Enough!" he barked, shoving a stack of forgotten crates aside. They toppled with a thunderous crash, splintered wood scattering like broken promises, dust billowing in choking clouds. Dust billowed up, choking the air, and in that haze truth spilled unchecked, the scent of aged wood sharp. "She's mine," he snarled at Liam, but his eyes flicked to Sarah, the insecurity he'd masked with bravado surging forth, raw and exposed. He confessed it all, the fabricated perfect life, the affairs that propped up his ego, the control he wielded to stave off the void inside, words tumbling in the melancholic hush. Evelyn recoiled, guilt flooding her veins like icy water, her manipulations laid bare. The subtle encouragements to Sarah, the lies to Michael, all to shield her fragile heart, the cold seeping deeper. Sarah laughed, a hollow sound that echoed bitterly off the walls, reverberating in the vast space. "You all pitied me, didn't you? The outsider, watching your little games." Her words dripped with jealousy, her fear of unworthiness confirmed in the unraveling, voice fracturing. She lunged forward, grabbing Evelyn's arm, nails biting into skin, drawing faint beads of warmth. "How could you? I thought we were friends." The plea dissolved into sobs, her identity quest crumbling amid the chaos, tears hot against the chill. The warehouse doors groaned open then, unbidden by wind or will, admitting a trickle of late-night passers-by, workers from the nearby docks, drawn by the shouts, their footsteps crunching on gravel outside. Whispers rippled through the growing crowd, phones emerging to capture the spectacle. Michael's arrogance reduced to desperate pleas. Evelyn's guarded shell shattered by remorse. Sarah's envy exposed in raw fury, flashes piercing the gloom. Secrets unfurled like frayed wires sparking in the dim light. Affairs, deceptions, the hidden relationships that bound and broke them, the air electric with exposure. Evelyn sank to her knees amid the debris, the concrete biting cold through her jeans, rough and unforgiving. Guilt coiled in her chest, heavy and unrelenting, as the weight of her unspoken truths crushed the air from her lungs. Each breath labored. Michael turned away, his perfect world in ruins, while Sarah staggered back, lost in the despair of her own unraveling, shadows swallowing her form. The crowd's murmurs swelled, a suffocating chorus that sealed their chaos, leaving only the slow drip of regret in the oppressive silence that followed, echoing endlessly. The accusation lingered like a poison in the dim warehouse, Evelyn's frozen stance unraveling into numb paralysis as guilt coiled tight around her chest, squeezing relentlessly. Hours dissolved in oppressive silence, the rusted walls closing in, mirroring the fractures within, the chill seeping into every crevice. By the shadowed hush of midnight, the raw edges of betrayal had carved deeper, binding them in a melancholic web of inescapable consequence. Fates entwined, souls scarred, despair settling like dust over shattered illusions, heavy and unyielding. The glass shattered against the warehouse floor, shards scattering like brittle accusations underfoot, glinting faintly in the dim light. Sarah's hand still gripped the neck of the bottle she'd hurled, her knuckles white, as Liam's words hung in the fractured silence. "You're sleeping with her, aren't you?" Directed at Michael, but slicing into all of them, the echo reverberating off the metal walls. Michael straightened, his tailored shirt rumpled from the night's unraveling, eyes narrowing behind the mask of composure he wore like armor, shadows carving his features. He stepped over the glittering debris, boots crunching deliberately, as if each fragment could be ground back into oblivion, the sound gritty and slow. "You think that's the truth you're digging for, Liam? Some cheap affair to pin on me?" His voice was smooth, laced with that arrogant lilt, but underneath thrummed the tremor of a man teetering on the edge of exposure, the air thick with tension. He couldn't let it crack. Not the perfect life he'd built on half-truths. The family image polished to a sheen, yet fraying now. Yet Liam's gaze bored into him, unyielding, forcing the insecurity to coil tighter in his gut, cold and insistent. Sarah backed against a stack of crates, the wood rough and splintered against her spine, its musty scent invading her nostrils like a reminder of decay, prickling her skin. Her chest heaved, envy twisting sharper now, not just for the lives others flaunted, but for Michael's unyielding front, Liam's relentless pursuit, a bitter knot. She wanted to scream that she wasn't some prize or pawn, that her stolen moments with Michael weren't about love, but escape. A desperate grasp for something solid amid her own dissolving sense of self, the chill biting deeper. "Stop it," she whispered, but the words dissolved into the oppressive dimness, the single hanging bulb casting long shadows that swallowed her form, flickering uncertainly. "Unworthy," the fear whispered. Failure etched in every envious glance she'd stolen, shadows lengthening. Why did their secrets bind her tighter, stripping away the identity she clawed to claim, relentless and slow? Liam didn't flinch, his frame rigid in the center of the space, hands clenched at his sides, as if reining in the urge to seize control of the chaos, muscles taut. He'd orchestrated this confrontation, piecing together whispers and glances, driven by the gnawing dread of his own fabricated world crumbling, piece by slow piece. But now, with the accusation out, the truth loomed not as liberation, but as a noose. His obsession with unraveling them all exposing the lie he'd told himself, that control could shield him from the void inside, dark and yawning. "Deny it all you want," he said, voice low and measured, each syllable a deliberate push against the mounting pressure, echoing faintly. "But we're all tangled in this now. You, her, the mess you've made." His eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to Michael, the weight of their shared history pressing down, unspoken betrayals surfacing like rot in the walls, the scent sharp and decaying. Michael halted inches from Liam, the air between them thick with the tang of spilled liquor and sweat-soaked tension, cloying and heavy. He wanted to laugh it off, reclaim the narrative, but the facade splintered under Liam's stare, revealing the hollow man beneath, terrified of the control slipping away, slipping like sand. Sarah slid down the crate, knees buckling, the cold concrete biting through her jeans as despair settled heavy in her bones, aching and deep. Their fates intertwined not by choice, but by the scars they'd inflicted. Michael's arrogance masking isolation, her envy fueling isolation, Liam's determination birthing entrapment, shadows weaving tighter. No escape, no clean severance, just the slow bleed of acceptance, the guilt of what they'd become to each other, melancholic and unrelenting. In the dim hum of the warehouse, their breaths synced into a reluctant rhythm, the pressure coiling tighter, binding them in the wreckage of truths half buried, the faint buzz of the bulb underscoring the hush. The fractured silence stretched into an oppressive void, the warehouse air thick with unspoken betrayals, dust motes hanging like suspended regrets. Sarah released the bottle's neck, letting it clatter among the shards, her chest heaving with a guilt that clawed deeper than rage, nails digging inward. One by one, they scattered into the night, Michael vanishing into the shadows, Liam's footsteps echoing hollowly, each retreating to solitary corners of the city, the cold air swallowing them. Hours bled into a melancholic dawn, unease settling like fog, as isolation amplified the weight of their secrets, stirring hidden fractures beneath the surface, slow and insidious. I can't take this back. The bottle's jagged edge bites into Sarah's palm, warm blood trickling down her wrist, but she doesn't drop it, the metallic scent mingling with the decay. The warehouse echoes with the accusation, Liam's voice, sharp as the glass underfoot, still vibrating in her skull, relentless. Michael? No, not him. It's Evelyn's shadow she envies, the way Liam orbits her like she's the sun they all pretend to bask in, a dim, unreachable glow. Sarah stumbles back against a rusted pillar, the metal cold and unyielding against her spine, biting through her coat. Her breath comes in shallow hitches, each one pulling at the envy coiled in her gut, twisting it into something uglier. Guilt for wanting what she can't have, for shattering the lie they all wore so thinly, the air heavy with her labored draws. Liam paces the perimeter, his footsteps deliberate, crunching shards like he's testing the ground for traps, each step echoing in the vast space. He needs to know everything, peeled back until the truths bleed out, raw and staining. But control slips from his fingers. The accusation wasn't just for Michael. It was a probe into all of them. And now Evelyn's eyes, wide and fractured, reflect his own unraveling, shadows mirroring shadows. He stops, fists clenched at his sides, staring at the shadowed corner where she huddles, the gloom deepening. Abandoned? No, he's the one chasing ghosts of identities they buried long ago, elusive and cold. The fear gnaws. What if this lie traps him forever? A false self he built to shield the obsession that devours him, slow and consuming. He wants to reach for her, command the moment back, but his voice sticks, heavy with the weight of what he's unleashed, the silence pressing in. Evelyn curls into herself on the grimy floor, knees drawn up, the chill seeping through her thin sweater like fingers prying at her skin, cold and insistent. Sarah's outburst, Liam's words, they strip her bare, exposing the desires she's hidden behind guarded smiles, raw and vulnerable. Loved? Accepted? The laughter they faked earlier feels like ash in her throat now, dry and bitter. She rocks slightly, the motion automatic, a rhythm to ward off the abandonment creeping in, shadows flickering. Her mind fractures, flashes of rejection, of hands pulling away when her needs spilled out too raw, vivid and haunting. Manipulation was her armor, twisting situations to keep them close. But now it crumbles, layer by layer. Guilt floods her, for the games, for craving their gaze on her true, broken self, a wave crashing slow. A sob escapes, muffled against her sleeve, and the warehouse amplifies it, turning her isolation into a cavernous echo, reverberating endlessly. Mental threads fray. She sees herself splintering, the anxiety blooming into something sharper. Voices whispering she's unworthy, unlovable, relentless in the hush. Liam's silhouette looms distant, Sarah's bloodied hand a accusation, and the unease settles like dust, thick and suffocating, binding them in their separate hells, melancholic and deep. Sarah slides down the pillar, the bottle clattering away, forgotten, rolling into the shadows. Envy wars with shame. She threw it to shatter the facade, to claim space for her own lost self. But all it revealed was her unworthiness, a hollow victory. Liam halts his pacing, drawn by Evelyn's soft whimpers. His drive to uncover clashing with the control he craves, tension coiling. He kneels at a distance, words failing. Evelyn. She flinches, the sound pulling her deeper into the spiral, her guarded walls fracturing under the weight of suppressed turmoil, cracks widening. The air tastes metallic, guilt's bitter tang mingling with the warehouse's decay. Each breath a reminder of the masks they've shed too late, heavy and labored. Unease threads through them, invisible wires tightening, as isolation devours the fragile bonds they once pretended to cherish, slow and inexorable. 3 days crawled by in a haze of shadowed regrets, the warehouse's chill seeping into Sarah's bones like an unyielding fog, persistent and cold. Her bandaged hand throbbed with every pulse, a constant reminder of the fracture she'd wrought. But it was the gnawing guilt that truly oppressed her. Evelyn's effortless pull on Liam twisting like a knife in her chest, sharp and unrelenting. Sleepless nights blurred into days, suspicion festering beneath her skin, until she could bear it no longer. Her pen hovering over paper in the dim lamplight of her solitary room, the glow casting long shadows. That's when Liam realized the letter in his pocket, creased and ink-smudged from hours of rewriting, would never be read, its weight pressing like a stone. He had poured his guilt into those words, admissions of the lies he'd spun to keep them all tethered, his frantic need to control the unraveling threads of their shared delusion, raw and confessional. Evelyn's apartment door stood ajar, a sliver of lamplight spilling onto the dim hallway like an accusation, warm yet foreboding. The scent of stale coffee and wilted lilies hung in the air, thick enough to choke on, cloying and melancholic, as he pushed inside without knocking, the hinge creaking softly. The room unfolded in shadows, furniture hunched like silent witnesses, looming in the gloom. Evelyn sat on the edge of the couch, her shoulders curved inward, fingers twisting a strand of hair that caught the low glow from a single bulb, trembling faintly. She looked up, eyes widening not with surprise but something sharper, recognition laced with dread, shadows deepening in her gaze. Michael lounged beside her, too close, his arm draped possessively across the back of the cushion, brushing her shoulder, the fabric whispering. Arrogance clung to him still, but cracked now, his gaze flicking to Liam with a mix of defiance and unease, tension humming. "Liam," Evelyn breathed, her voice a fragile thread, barely stirring the heavy air. She rose halfway, then sank back, as if the weight of the moment pinned her down, unyielding. "You shouldn't be here." The words hung, laced with unspoken plea. He stepped forward, the floorboards groaning under his boots, each creak amplifying the pulse in his temples, a slow rhythm of dread. The letter burned against his thigh, its contents a raw confession. How he'd manipulated their evenings together, steering conversations away from the truths that festered, all to avoid the trap of his own false self. Shadows of guilt. Guilt had driven him here, a desperate bid to reclaim authenticity, to let go of the control that suffocated them all, heavy and oppressive. But this, Michael's hand now settling fully on her knee, casual yet claiming, twisted the knife deeper, warmth intruding on the chill. Suspicion coiled in Liam's gut, cold and insistent, twisting like wire. Had she known? Planned this quiet betrayal while he wrestled his shadows alone, in solitary torment? Evelyn's face, usually a mask of hopeful vulnerability, fractured now, revealing the manipulator beneath, the one who twisted situations to shield her hidden desires from rejection, cracks visible in the dim light. "I wrote to you," he said, voice low, pulling the paper free, the rustle soft. It fluttered slightly in his grip, edges worn from his obsessive folds, ink faded. About everything. The lies. How I've been holding on too tight, trying to protect us from falling apart. The admission lingered, vulnerable. Michael shifted, his posture straightening into that familiar arrogance. But his eyes betrayed the fear, the insecure boy peeking through the facade, shadows playing. She doesn't need your confessions, Liam. Not anymore. He leaned closer to Evelyn, as if staking territory, his fingers tightening just enough to whiten her skin, possessive and tense. Authenticity? This was Michael's drive manifesting, confronting his voids by seizing what he craved, masking terror of exposure with bold theft, the air thickening. Evelyn's gaze darted between them, hopeful flickers warring with the vulnerability that threatened to swallow her whole, a storm within. She reached for the letter, but her hand hovered, trembling not from cold, but from the crumbling pretense, fingers quivering. I needed someone who wouldn't run, she whispered, tears carving silent paths down her cheeks, hot and slow. The words landed like blows, stirring Liam's frustration into a storm of questions, relentless. Was this her true self emerging, seeking genuine connection in Michael's arms? Or another layer of control, abandoning him to his lies, the melancholic weight pressing down? The air thickened with unspoken accusations, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator, a low drone. Liam's chest tightened, the facade of their fragile happiness shattering like thin ice, cracking slow. Guilt surged through him, not just his own, but theirs. Evelyn's for the solace she'd sought elsewhere, Michael's for the arrogance that hid his fractures. A shared burden. Suspicion bloomed fully now, poisoning the hope he'd clung to, bitter and spreading. He dropped the letter onto the coffee table, where it landed amid scattered coasters and an empty wine glass, its words dissolving into irrelevance, the faint clink echoing. Without another word, he turned away, the door clicking shut behind him like a final judgment, sharp in the hush. The hallway swallowed him whole, leaving the trio to their exposed turmoil, masks in ruins, shadows lengthening. The unread letter burned like a hidden scar against Liam's skin, its confessions dissolving into the heavy silence of the room, fading echoes. Guilt wrapped around him, a melancholic shroud, as shadows lengthened across the floor, mirroring the group's fracturing bonds, slow and inevitable. In that oppressive hush, the last figure lingered on the periphery, fear twisting in their gut like a slow, unraveling thread. Desperation whispering promises of redemption through revelation, faint and haunting. The faint creak of the floorboard underfoot yanked Evelyn back. Michael's voice, years ago, whispering confessions in the dim light of their old apartment, his breath hot against her neck as he admitted the affairs, the lies that bound them like invisible chains, the memory vivid and suffocating. She froze in the shadowed hallway of the cabin, the wooden planks groaning under her weight like accusations, creaking slow. The air inside carried the stale tang of forgotten coffee and damp wool, thick enough to coat her throat, cloying and cold. Evelyn's hand lingered on the doorknob to the living room, where Michael and Sarah sat by the flickering lamp, their silhouettes hunched over a half-empty bottle of wine, the liquid glinting darkly. She had come to mend things, to peel back the layers of pretense they'd all worn for so long. Her drive to connect, truly, without the manipulations that kept her safe. A fragile hope. But hope twisted now, laced with the fear that one wrong word would shatter it all, leaving her exposed, unwanted, the shadows pressing close. Inside, Sarah shifted on the sagging couch, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass in slow, deliberate circles, the cool glass smooth. The marginalization gnawed at her. Evenings like this, Evelyn and Michael trading glances that excluded her. Their shared history a wall she couldn't scale, solid and cold. Empowered in her solitude during the day, sketching wild designs that no one saw, she felt the uncertainty creep in now, jealousy blooming like a bruise, dark and tender. Why should they hoard their authenticity while she scraped for scraps of worth, the envy coiling? Her rival, Michael, with his arrogant facade masking those quivering insecurities, held the key. Exposing him would lift her, justify the envy she'd buried, a desperate grasp. "You know," Sarah said, her voice slicing the quiet like a dull knife, low and deliberate, the words hanging heavy. "Michael's been carrying something heavy, hasn't he, Evelyn?" She leaned forward, eyes locking on him, the wine's bitter scent rising as she tilted her glass, sharp and intoxicating. No more waiting on the sidelines. This would bind them to her truth, make her the anchor, shadows flickering across her face. Michael's posture stiffened, but he forced a chuckle, the sound brittle, echoing off the paneled walls, hollow in the hush. Control, his crutch, the arrogance that veiled the fear of unraveling, fraying now. He met Sarah's gaze, then flicked to Evelyn, searching for alliance, eyes darting. "What's this now? Drunk confessions?" But his words faltered, the room's oppressive hush pressing in, amplifying the thud of his pulse in his ears, relentless. Evelyn stepped through the door, the hinges' squeal underscoring her entrance, sharp and grating. She saw it then, the crack in Michael's mask, the way his eyes darted, pleading silently, shadows deepening. Guilt flooded her own chest, hot and unrelenting, memories of her own deceptions surfacing, the subtle nudges to keep him close, manipulating threads to avoid the abandonment she dreaded, a wave crashing. "Sarah," she murmured, sinking into the armchair, its faded fabric rough against her palms, worn and scratchy. "What are you—" "He's terrified," Sarah pressed on, her tone gaining a desperate edge, words tumbling like stones down a slope, unstoppable. All that bravado, and underneath, he's scared of losing it all. The control. Us. Remember that night last year, Michael? When you broke down after the call from your ex? Crying like a child, begging Evelyn not to leave. You think we forgot?" She turned to Evelyn, seeking validation, her own fear of unworthiness fueling the betrayal. If she dragged his shadows into the light, hers might fade, the lamp's glow warm yet unforgiving. Michael's face drained, the arrogance crumbling like ash, scattering slow. He gripped the armrest, knuckles whitening, breath shallow, ragged. Fear clawed up his throat, raw and exposing, the terror of his true self laid bare, insecurities spilling out, a flood. "Stop," he whispered, voice cracking, but the dam broke. Tears welled, unbidden, as guilt from years of hiding surged, hot and blinding. I can't. It's all been a lie to hold on." The confession hung, heavy in the melancholic air. Evelyn reached out, her hand hovering, then dropping, fingers trembling. Vulnerability warred with her shadow. She wanted to pull him close, forge the genuine bond she craved. But the fear gripped her. Rejection loomed if she embraced this mess, cold and looming. Sarah watched, empowered yet adrift. The exposure not elevating her as hoped, only amplifying the melancholic void, shadows dancing. The lamp's glow flickered, casting long shadows that danced with their unraveling guilts. The slow burn of truth suffocating the room, air thickening. The memory's chill seeped deeper, wrapping Evelyn in a shroud of unrelenting guilt, each step through the cabin's oppressive gloom echoing the weight of buried truths, footsteps heavy. Days dissolved into a melancholic haze, her shame festering like an untreated wound, throbbing slow, until the evening of the gathering arrived, shadowed faces assembling under the low hum of strained silences, where fragile trusts teetered on the brink of shattering revelations, tension humming. The metallic tang of blood lingered on Michael's lip, where he'd bitten it too hard, a sharp reminder amid the clink of half-empty wine glasses on the oak table, faint and tinkling. Sarah's gaze fixed on that tiny red smear, her pulse thudding like a distant drum in her ears, pulling her from the haze of that old memory. Evelyn's name, long shed like a skin too tight, now cracking open again under the weight of this forced reunion, shadows pressing. Liam shifted in his chair, the leather creaking softly, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass as if mapping an escape route, deliberate and slow.
"You think you can just waltz back in,"
Michael started, his voice low, gravelly, laced with the arrogance he wielded like armor, rough-edged. But tonight it frayed at the edges, his eyes darting between Sarah and Liam, searching for the fracture point, shadows carving his face. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, the candlelight carving shadows across his face, flickering warm. "After all the stories you spun, Sarah, Evelyn, whatever the hell you call yourself now." The words hung, accusatory. Sarah's throat tightened, the air in the dining room thickening with the scent of overcooked rosemary from the abandoned roast, bitter and cloying. She wanted to claim her space, to stand tall in the individuality she clawed for, but the uncertainty coiled in her gut like smoke, insidious. "It's not about names, Michael. It's about what you buried. The affairs.
"The lies that chained us."
Her words tumbled out, raw, a confession meant to empower, to strip away the jealousy that had eaten at her for years, envying the ease others wore, while she hid behind borrowed identities, voice cracking. But as she spoke, her voice cracked, exposing the fear beneath. Unworthy, always the failure in love's harsh mirror, the candle flames dancing. Liam's laugh was bitter, short, slicing through the tension like a dull knife, sharp yet muffled. He slammed his glass down, red wine sloshing over the edge, staining the white cloth like spilled secrets, dark and spreading. "Chained? You both act like I'm the outsider here." His frustration boiled over, eyes narrowing as he fixed on Michael, then Sarah, his need to control the narrative slipping from his grasp, fingers tightening. He'd orchestrated this gathering, this tense dinner in the old family home, to unravel the knots of his own false self, the obsessive grip on truths he could bend but never break, shadows looming. "I knew about Evelyn from the start. The way you whispered to her, Michael, in that apartment, breath hot and promises hollow. But you? Sarah? Pretending you could outrun it all?" The revelation lingered, probing. The revelation hung there, Michael's intended probe twisting into a blade turned inward, cutting deep. He recoiled, his face paling, the arrogance crumbling to reveal the shadow. Insecurities gnawing deep, the fear of losing control now a floodgate burst, relentless. "You don't get it," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper, hands clenching into fists on the tablecloth, fabric bunching. "I did it for us, to hold on." But the words rang false even to him, shame flooding his chest like ice water, drowning the drive for authenticity in a tide of exposed frailty, cold and numbing. Sarah rose, chair scraping harshly against the floorboards, her empowered facade shattering as envy twisted into self-loathing. Why couldn't she be enough without the masks, the sound grating? "For us? You destroyed us!" Tears pricked her eyes, hot and unbidden, the weight of her own lies pressing down, mirroring Michael's confessions from years ago, heavy. Liam stood too, his questioning gaze fracturing into something desperate, the obsession cracking as he realized control was illusion, leaving him trapped in the echo of their shared deceptions, shadows shifting. The room erupted then, not in shouts, but in fractured silences broken by accusations. Michael's fearful admissions of more hidden nights, Sarah's halting unraveling of jealous impulses that had forged her false selves, Liam's frustrated unraveling of the manipulations he'd woven to shield his fragile core, words tumbling slow, wine glasses tipped, shattering on the floor in brittle cascades, shards glinting like fragments of trust, tinkling. Shame wrapped around them all, oppressive and unrelenting, forcing each to stare into the abyss of their vulnerabilities. The lies that bound tighter than love ever could, identities dissolving in the slow, melancholic burn of truth's unforgiving light, flickering candles casting erratic glows. Hours blurred into a suffocating night, the oak table's echoes fading as Sarah wandered her shadowed apartment, the wine's bitterness souring on her tongue, lingering. Evelyn's name clawed deeper, unraveling threads of a buried life, each tug laced with despair that seeped into her bones like damp rot, cold and pervasive. Guilt coiled heavy in her chest, a melancholic fog pressing against the walls, whispering of reclaimable fragments, until the haze sharpened into a reckless resolve, her fingers trembling toward the edge of no return, shadows deepening. The echo of Michael's laugh, sharp and unbidden, that had once filled these walls like broken glass, now a ghost in the hush. Sarah's throat tightened around the absence, her fingers tracing the cool rim of her wineglass, where the blood had smeared earlier, now diluted to a faint pink swirl, smooth and slick. No one spoke. The oak table stretched between them, barren of the easy banter that might have masked this unraveling, wood grain stark. Liam sat across from her, his eyes fixed on Evelyn, on the woman who wore her old name like a ghost shroud, his frustration carving lines into his face, unspoken questions piling like dust in the corners of the room, accumulating slow. "I was her," Evelyn said finally, her voice a threadbare whisper that snagged on the silence, fragile. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, the candlelight catching the faint tremor in her hands. Not trembling, but holding still against some inner quake, steady yet strained. "Evelyn, the one you chased across cities, Liam. The one who lied, because loving you felt like drowning in my own skin." Her words spilled out, raw and jagged, exposing the web. The fabricated pasts, the stolen identities, the desperate pursuit of a love that demanded she become someone else, shadows flickering. Hope flickered in her eyes, vulnerable, reaching for connection, even as rejection loomed like a shadow she couldn't outrun, dark and encroaching. Liam's chair scraped back an inch, the sound a slow grind against the floorboards, grating softly. He wanted to let go, to unravel the control that had kept him tethered to illusions. But the fear clawed deeper, trapped in this false self, the man who'd built walls to hide his obsessions, solid yet cracking. And Sarah? His gaze shifted to her, questioning, laced with the frustration of truths too tangled to grasp, eyes piercing. "Who are you in all this? Another layer? Or just the lie we both needed?" The words hung, probing. Sarah felt the envy coil in her chest, hot and familiar, watching Evelyn's confession bridge the gap to Liam, a burning knot. She was empowered now, or so she'd told herself, embracing the fragments of her individuality, building self-worth from the ruins, tentative. But uncertainty gnawed, the fear of unworthiness blooming like ink in water, dark and spreading. They were connecting, these two, over her buried past, and it stung, that jealousy towards their fragile hope, sharp. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around the phone she'd silenced earlier, cool metal. One message. One reckless tap. She could send it, the photo from years ago, Evelyn's hidden desires laid bare in a moment of abandon, the kind that would shatter Liam's budding trust, drive a wedge between rival and the man she'd loved first, shadows whispering temptation. "I can't," she murmured, but the words dissolved, faint in the hush. Despair seeped in, heavy as the wine's residue on her tongue. The metallic aftertaste of blood, lingering from Michael's phantom bite, bitter. Her thumb hovered, then pressed. The message winged away into the ether, sabotaging the thread Evelyn wove toward Liam, reclaiming what Sarah believed was hers, through this moral fracture, irreversible. No turning back. The room pressed closer, the air thick with the scent of spilled Merlot and unspoken ruin, guilt etching its slow path through her veins, melancholic. Evelyn's phone buzzed on the table, innocuous at first, the vibration sharp. She glanced down and her face drained of color, hope curdling to something brittle, eyes widening. Liam's eyes narrowed, the questioning turning to fracture, shadows sharpening. Sarah watched it all, the web tightening around her own throat, despair settling like ash in her lungs. No laughter, no easy absolution, only the hollow space where wholeness might have been. Empty and cold. The silence at the table thickened into an oppressive shroud, guilt coiling like smoke in Sarah's chest, as the wine's faint stain mocked their fractured bonds, dark and accusing. Hours bled into a restless night, the absence of Michael's echo festering into a slow-burning resentment that poisoned the air. Insidious. By dawn, the manipulated heartstrings pulled taut, the weight of unspoken toxicities pressing down, inevitable rift hovering just beyond the shadowed threshold, looming. Outside, the distant rumble of a delivery truck grinding to a halt, low and grinding. Inside, Evelyn's breath, ragged and insistent, scraping against the silence like sandpaper on bone, harsh. She set the wineglass down, its rim still faintly etched with that diluted pink streak, a ghost of the earlier spill, cool to the touch. Liam leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, his knuckles whitening not from tension, but from the deliberate press of his own nails into skin, biting deep. Michael paced the length of the dim living room, his footsteps muffled by the threadbare rug, each one a deliberate thud that echoed Evelyn's pulse, rhythmic and heavy. "You think I didn't see it?" Michael's voice cracked the quiet first, low and venomous, laced with the